So the question says find the derivative of that as changing x approaches 0. So I told you that formula is the same as the formula for first principle, the one that says f prime of x is equal to the lim. Instead of h we say changing x approaches 0. Then we say what? X. Instead of h we say changing x minus f of x, all divided by what? All divided by the change in x. There's like the first principle. Usually they put h here, and h here. So from there we know what to do. Where we see what? Where we see x. Where we see x, we are going to add change in x. From where? From this equation. So which means from there, I will have what? I will have a x plus the change in x all squared plus I still have the x plus the change in x. Then I say minus into my f of x is what? Is x squared plus x. From there I divide everything by what? By the change in what? In x. Then from there I start to do what? To simplify and multiplying those brackets. So which means I will have x squared plus the change in x squared plus 2 times x change in x plus the x plus the change in x minus x squared minus x. So if you can check there, we divide everything here by what? By the change in x, which means I'm going to have what? The change in x. If you can check, this x squared, they do what? They cancel each other. Then from there, we're left with the lim as change in x approaches what? Approaches 0. So if you can check, I'm remaining with the change in x squared plus 2x change in x plus, if you can check also, I forgot something, the x's they cancel. So I'm remaining with what? With the change in x, all divided by what? By the change in x. From there, I remove the common factor of change in x in the denominator, in the numerator, which means I will remain with change in x into what? Into change in x plus 2x plus 1, all divided by the change in x. So with that, I know that this one cancels that one, which means I will remain with what? I will remain with the lim as change in x approaches 0 of what? 0 of the change in x plus 2x plus 1. From there I start to substitute, which means I will have 0 plus 2x plus 1. Therefore, my f prime of x is equal to 2x plus 1. You can even see there. So let's jump to another one. They say find g prime of x given that g of x is that as change in x approaching 0. Still the same procedure, which means our g prime of x will be equal to the lim as change in what? In x approaching 0 of what? Of x into x plus what? X plus the change in x minus the g of x, all divided by what? By the change in x, which means from there I will have equal sign. I still have my lim as change in x approaching 0, which means in my square root where I see x, I will add x plus change in x, which means I will have x plus change in x plus 1 minus that other side. I will have what? I will have x plus 1, all divided by what? Divided by what? By the change in x. From there, another thing that we can do there is to rationalize that thing. When you rationalize there, you are going to get a square root of x plus change in x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1, all divided by square root of x plus change in x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1. From there you rationalize because I see a SAT, which means I will have equal sign, then the lim as change in x approaches what? Approaches 0, which means from there we have difference between two squares. In the numerator, I will remain with change in x plus 1 minus into x plus 1 all divided by change in x into square root of x plus change in x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1. So from there I will multiply the bracket, which is the lim as change in x approaches 0, which means I will have x plus change in x plus 1 minus x minus 1 divide by what? Divide by change in x all into square root of x plus change in x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1. Then if you can check that those x's they cancel and the 1 they cancel, we remain with the change in x in the numerator. So we remain with the lim change in x approaching 0, then we have change in x all divided by change in x into square root of x plus change in x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1. If you can check the change in x they cancel, we remain with the lim as change in x approaches 0 of 1 all over square root of x plus change in x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1. Then from there we substitute our 0. We're going to have 1 over square root of x plus 0 plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1, which is equal to 1 over square root of x plus 1 plus square root of x plus 1, which are the like terms in the denominator, which is going to be what? Is going to be 2 square root of x plus 1. So therefore the derivative of g of x is equal to 1 over 2 square root of x plus 1. So the next one we have that one, they say find f prime of x, which means our f prime of x will be equal to the lim as change in x approaching 0, then we have f x plus change in x minus f of x all divided by change in x. Then from there we substitute on our original this one, which is f of x, which means I will have the lim as change in x approaches 0, which means I'm going to have 1 over x plus change in x minus 1 over x all divided by the change in x. So in the numerator I see a fraction minus a fraction, which means I'm going to do LCD, which is going to be 1 times x, which is x, minus 1 times that, which is x into change in x, all divided by what? This one times this one, which is x into x plus the change in x, all divided by what? By the change in x, which means I will remain with equal sign, the lim as change in x approaches 0, which means I'm going to have x minus change in x, divide by what? Divide by x into x plus change in x, all divided by change in x. If you can see, this one cancel that one, and then I'm remaining with what? I'm remaining with equal sign, the lim as change in x approaches 0, so which means I'm going to have negative change in x, all divided by what? By x into x plus change in x. So the change in x, this one, I'm going to do the reciprocal of it, which is what? Which is 1 over the change in x. So if you can see, this one will cancel that one. So I'm going to remain with equal sign. The lim as change in x approaches what? 0. So which means I'm going to have negative 1 all divided by what? By x into x plus change in x. So now I can substitute, which means where I see change in x, I'm going to put what? I'm going to put 0. I say plus 0, which is equal to negative 1 over x squared. So which means therefore the derivative of g prime of x using that thing is negative 1 over x squared. Then you are done from there.